It's been staring at the same pipe under the kitchen sink for 40 minutes. The water has been shut off. There's a flashlight propped against the cabinet door. He's on his back, shoulders wedged between the cabinet walls, and he's got that look on his face. The one that's equal parts concentration and quiet stubbornness. His wife offered to call a plumber 3 days ago. Said he'd take care of it. That was 3 days ago. It's a Sunday afternoon in November. The light outside is gray and flat. The kids are grown and gone. The house is quiet, in a way that houses get when they've been filled with noise for 20 years and then, suddenly, aren't. There's football on the television in the other room, volume low, nobody really watching it. He tightens something, loosens it. Tries a different angle. I've almost got it, he calls out, to nobody in particular. Maybe you know someone like this. Maybe you are someone like this. Here's what nobody ever stops to ask. Why? Not as a criticism, not as a judgment, but genuinely, why does a man like this find it so difficult to say 4 words? I could use help. The answer isn't stubbornness. Not really. It's something older than that. Something that was built into the architecture of who these men are, long before they were old enough to understand what was being built. So it's quiet. That's what this is about. There's a generation of American men, born roughly between 1965 and 1980, who learned something very specific about what it means to need other people. They learned it from fathers who didn't talk about their feelings because their fathers didn't talk about theirs. They learned it mother from who worked 2 jobs and needed their sons to be capable, not complicated. They learned it from a culture that was just beginning to ask new questions about masculinity, while still being deeply shaped by the old answers. These men grew up in an era when asking for help was at some level a small confession of inadequacy, not always spoken aloud, not always intentional, but felt, and feelings absorbed in childhood tend to last. Think about what it was like to be a boy in the 1970s or early 1980s in America. The playgrounds were rougher. The emotional vocabulary was thinner. If you fell and hurt yourself, you got back up. If something was wrong at home, you didn't bring it to school. If something was hard, you figured it out, because the alternative, admitting you couldn't, felt worse than the difficulty itself. There's a particular memory that a lot of men from this generation carry, though they rarely share it. The first time they asked for something they genuinely needed and were made to feel small for asking. It was a parent, distracted or overwhelmed, who responded with impatience. Maybe it was a teacher who made an example. Maybe it was a friend group where vulnerability was currency you couldn't afford to spend. It doesn't matter how it happened exactly. What matters is what the lesson was. The lesson was, figure it out yourself. And the men who received that lesson clearly enough, early enough, internalized it so deeply that it stopped feeling like a rule they were following and started feeling like who they were. There's a word psychologists use for this. They call it self-reliance as identity. The fusion of independence with self-concept, where needing help doesn't just feel inconvenient, it feels like a threat to the self. Not, I'd prefer to handle this. If I can't handle this, who am I? The American Psychological Association has tracked a quiet but consistent finding across decades of research on adult men. Among men currently aged 45 to 65, the ability to self-disclose, to ask for help, to name a need, to admit uncertainty is significantly lower than in any other demographic group studied. These men don't just avoid asking for help. Many of them have genuinely lost access to the internal language that asking for help requires. They can't always name what's wrong because they spent so many years not naming it. The man under the sink isn't just fixing a pipe. He's doing something he's been doing his whole life. He's managing the distance between himself and the feeling of helplessness. As long as he can keep that distance, As long as his hands are moving and the problem is solvable and he doesn't have to say the words, he's okay. But here's the part that gets complicated. Here's where this gets interesting. That same quality, the one that made these men impossible to shake, impossible to stop, impossible to discourage, is also the quality that, over time, created a particular kind of loneliness. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind you see in movies, where a man sits alone in a bar and someone asks what's wrong. The quieter kind. The kind that lives in the space between two people who have been together for 25 years and still don't fully know what's happening inside each other. The kind that shows up at 3 a.m. when something is wrong. But the man lying awake in the dark won't wake his wife because she needs her sleep and because he can handle it, because this is just what he does. Maybe you've been there, maybe not, but you probably know someone who has. The loneliness of self-sufficiencies is one of the most poorly understood experiences in the study of adult male psychology. It's not the same as being alone. These men are often surrounded by people who love them. It's more subtle than that. It's the loneliness of being known only up to a certain point, and then past that point being a mystery, even to yourself. There's research from Gallup showing that American men over 50 are among the most socially isolated adults in the developed world, not in terms of physical proximity, but in terms of genuine, intimate connection. Man can be married, employed, active in his community, a good father, and still have nobody in his life who truly knows what's happening inside him, because he never learned how to show them. The interesting thing, the thing that most of these men would never say out loud, is that this isolation wasn't entirely unwanted. It looks like confidence from the outside. Sometimes it's something more like armor. There's another side to this, and it's worth sitting with. Some men, when they look back honestly, recognize that the self-reliance wasn't only taught, it was also chosen. Chose as protection against the specific pain of needing someone and having them not show up. Against the particular vulnerability of asking for something and being told no, or being ignored, or being laughed at. If you never ask, you're never disappointed. That internal logic, quiet, protective, deeply rational in its own way, runs underneath the lives of a lot of Gen X men who carry everything alone. Self-sufficiency isn't just about competence. It's a careful management of risk. If I don't need you, you can't let me down. And for a generation that watched a lot of things fall apart, marriages, economies, institutions, promises, that logic made a certain kind of sense. The Pew Research Center found that Gen X adults show significantly higher rates of distrust in institutions, community systems, and social support structures than either baby boomers or millennials. These men watched the American manufacturing economy hollow out. They watched the promises their parents made about what hard work would deliver, and they saw those promises break. And some of them, quietly, extended that distrust to people as well. Not because they were cynical by nature, but because they learned, through direct experience, that needing something from the world was a gamble that didn't always pay. So they stopped needing. For a while, maybe a long while, it worked. Think about the version of this man in his 30s, maybe in his late 20s, moving through the world with a quiet certainty that most people found either impressive or slightly intimidating. He got things done. He didn't complain. When problems appeared, he handled them, sometimes before anyone else had even registered that there was a problem. He was the one people called, the one nobody worried about. There's a strange pride in being that person, quiet but real. There's a strange cost that arrives later, because the same walls that protected him also kept something out. Kept intimacy at arm's length, genuine connection, the kind that requires showing a person the parts of you that aren't handling things. Difficult to access, not impossible, but genuinely difficult. And by the time a man is in his 50s, the habit of self-sufficiency is so practiced, so automatic, that it doesn't feel like a choice anymore. It feels like a fact of nature. There's a moment. And many of these men have had it, though they rarely name it. When something happens that is bigger than what they can carry alone. A diagnosis, a loss, a failure that couldn't be quietly fixed. And the habit of self-sufficiency hits its limit. What happens then says a great deal. Some men, in that moment, discover that they have people, that the relationships they maintained, even at some emotional distance, are real enough to hold them. They underestimated what they had built. Others discover, with a particular kind of ache, that they don't. That the years of not needing anyone created a genuine gap. Not because people stopped caring, because they never learned how to let people in close enough to help. Both outcomes happen. Neither is inevitable. The NIH has found something in their longitudinal studies on aging men that tends to surprise people when they hear it. It's the single strongest predictor of well-being in men between 60 and 80. Stronger than physical health, stronger than financial security, stronger than career achievement, is the presence of at least one person they feel they can be completely honest with. Not successful, not healthy. Honest one person. Just one. A significant number of American men over 60, when surveyed, could not name that person. Think about what that means. The most capable generation of self-reliant men in modern American history. Men who built things, fixed things, raised families, houses quiet, kept showing up, arriving at the later chapters of their lives and realizing that the independence they were so proud of may have cost them the one thing that psychological research consistently identifies as irreplaceable. It's not a judgment, it's a fact. And facts like this deserve to be named. But here's the part that matters most. Here's the part worth staying for. None of this is permanent. None of it is fixed. The brain doesn't stop being capable of learning to ask for help at 55 or 60 or 65. The research on this is actually quite clear and quietly remarkable. What psychologists call earned security, the ability to develop genuine trust and intimacy even after a lifetime of protecting against it, is possible at any age. It doesn't come quickly. It doesn't come without some discomfort. But it comes. It usually starts with the smallest thing. Not a confession. Not a breakthrough. Just one moment, one ordinary moment, where a man lets someone in a little further than he normally would. Is something true that he normally wouldn't. Accepts help he normally would have refused. That's where it starts. Back in the kitchen, the pipe is fixed. He already knew it would be. He comes out from under the sink, wipes his hands on a towel, and looks at the faucet. His wife asks if he wants some coffee. He says yes. She brings it. They sit at the table together. The football game in the other room plays to nobody. For a few minutes, neither of them says anything. The comfortable kind of silence. The kind that only develops over decades. And maybe, on this particular Sunday afternoon, he almost says something. Something about how tired he's been lately. About something that's been sitting with him. He gets close to it. He can feel the words forming. He says it. Maybe he doesn't. But the fact that he got close, the fact that the door opened even slightly, means something. It's enough for now. It's a start. If you found something in this video that felt familiar, something that felt like it was describing a person you know, or a version of yourself, then the next step is a small one. Not a transformation, it's a small one. One honest conversation. One moment of letting someone in a little further. It doesn't have to be everything. It just has to be something. If you're drawn to this kind of storytelling, psychology, that starts with real human experience and tries to find the truth underneath it, this channel exists for exactly that. There's more here. It tends to go places most channels don't. Take care of yourself. and occasionally let someone else help you do it. There is one more thing worth saying about this. Something that tends to get lost in conversations about Gen X men and self-reliance, and the cost of carrying everything alone. These men, for all the complexity of what they built, and what they sometimes missed, they showed up. That matters. It matters more than modern culture sometimes acknowledges. In an age that is increasingly focused on emotional expressiveness as the measure of a man's psychological health, there is a risk of undervaluing what these men actually gave. The consistency, the presence, the fact that when something needed doing, they did it without needing recognition, without needing applause, without needing to process it first. The man under the sink on a Sunday afternoon in November, he is not broken. He is not a cautionary tale. He is someone who learned a particular way of being in the world. And that way served him and the people around him in real and lasting ways, even as it cost him certain things. The work is not to become a different person. The work is smaller than that. It's to create, in the later chapters of a life well lived, a little more room for the things that self-sufficiency kept at a distance. Room for honesty, for receiving, for saying occasionally to someone who has earned it, I could use some help with this, not as a defeat, as an expansion. The same man who fixed the pipe, who kept showing up, who built the life, he is capable of this too. Capacity didn't disappear. It was just waiting to be used. When the coffee is finished, and the afternoon light shifts, and the football game ends, with nobody watching, there's still time. There's still the evening. There's still tomorrow morning. There's still the conversation that hasn't happened yet, but could. The door doesn't have to be thrown open. It just has to be unlocked. That's enough. It's more than enough. If something in this video felt familiar, if it described something you've lived or something you've watched someone you love live through, then you already understand what this was really about. Psychology as a subject. Psychology as a mirror. These channels exist because some conversations need to happen. Because some things need to be named before they can be examined. Because a man sitting alone at 3 a.m. deserves to hear, at some point, that the way he was built made sense, and that the next chapter doesn't have to look exactly like the last one. That's what this is for. Take good care of yourself, and when someone offers to help, consider letting them. There's a particular kind of tiredness that comes with carrying everything alone for 40 years. Not physical tiredness exactly, something deeper. A tiredness in the part of a person that is responsible for being fine, for projecting competence, for being the one everyone else can lean on without ever leaning back. A lot of Gen X men know this tiredness very well. They've managed it through routine, through work, through staying busy enough that the tiredness doesn't have a chance to speak too clearly, through the simple discipline of keeping going. And keeping going is not nothing. Don't mistake what's being said here. The ability to keep going, to absorb difficulty and not collapse under it, to meet obligations even when meeting them is hard. That is a real thing, a valuable thing. It built families. It built neighborhoods. It kept things running during decades that tested a lot of people. But there's a question worth asking in the quieter moments. Not aggressively, just honestly, what would it feel like to be known? Not admired, respected, not needed. Just known, to have one person in the world who understood not just what you did, but what it cost. What you were afraid of, what you never said, what you wished had gone differently. What you're still carrying from 20 years ago that you've never told anyone about because it seemed too late, and because you weren't sure how to start, because the habit of not saying it had become so deep that breaking it felt like breaking something essential about yourself. What would it feel like? Most men in this generation, if they're honest, have thought about this at least once, have felt the edges of it in an unguarded moment, late at night, or on a long drive alone, or at a funeral for someone their own age, standing at the edge of a conversation they didn't quite know how to enter. The desire to be known didn't disappear just because the habit of hiding became dominant. It's still there. Quieter now. More patient. Still there. The APA's research on older male adults consistently finds that the men who report the highest life satisfaction in their later decades, the ones who describe themselves as genuinely content, not just functional, are almost universally men who, at some point in their 50s or 60s, made a conscious choice to let their guard down with at least one other person, a partner, a sibling, a long-standing friend, sometimes a therapist, sometimes just a neighbor they've known for 20 years. Not a wholesale transformation, not a personality change, just a decision to let one person see more than everyone else had been allowed to see. That decision changed things. Not immediately, not dramatically, but over time, consistently, measurably, it changed things. The man under the sink eventually comes out, wipes his hands, the pipe is fixed, the water is back on. He did what he said he'd do. And maybe, this time, when his wife hands him the coffee and asks how it went, he doesn't just say, fine. Maybe he says something small, something real. Something that opens the door half an inch wider than it was before. It doesn't have to be more than that. Half an inch is a beginning.